This is a glimpse into 120, a film depicting the near future. In the story, a tech company creates a new artificial intelligence machine. A machine rights activist works to free the AI and prove it's a conscious being. As you can imagine, it is a film that doesn't just entertain, but pulls you in, engages your curiosity, and makes you think. In this episode of Better Thinkers, I sit down with the creator, Jonathon Hardy, a filmmaker who explores how storytelling engages our thinking. Jonathon doesn't believe stories have to be driven by conflict. He believes they can be driven by wonder, curiosity, and the slow unraveling of mystery to leave a more positive impression on the audience. We talk about filmmaking as a form of thinking, not just expression, but exploration. A way to see differently, feel differently, learn differently as a mediary between filmmaker and audience. And we ask, what happens when young people begin to tell stories this way? How might it develop their thinking? Stay with me until the end, where following our conversation, I share why I believe filmmaking, done right, is one of the most important tools we can give young people today. This is episode 10 of Better Thinkers, Think Like a Filmmaker. Jonathon Hardy, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
All right. I'm really happy to have you on my podcast, Better Thinkers. Just for the viewers, we actually had a discussion a while ago as well, last year on your podcast, Another Problem Solved, right?
Yeah. Yes. I thought it was a good conversation. Unfortunately, I've taken a pause on that podcast, so I'm handing over the tasks to you, I guess.
I'll take the baton for now. Yeah, I had a chance to view some of the content of the other episodes that you had, so I do hope you have some time. Just for the viewers, a time for Jonathon, he's got 2 young children, and it's very, very pressing. So pause on all those side projects, right? Okay, so tell us a bit about yourself, Jonathon, and then tell us about your journey to filmmaking.
Well, I'm originally from Maine, and I've always been a storyteller since I was a kid. I can give you an example of me in my basement when I was, 7 or 8, just making the street kids that, we grew up with, like, okay, we're going to go make a play in my basement, and here's what we're going to do, and here's, how we're going to do this. And I had a tendency to do that in storytell. And that's just something I've kind of built up over the years as a passion in some sense. And, I went to school for it. I went to school technically for visual effects and animation because I had an infatuation with that. But as soon as I got into it all, it ended up being like screenwriting and directing became my favorite thing. So I kind of dropped the ball on the visual effects stuff and moved from that to directing and writing. Then off I went.
So in a sense, you felt you've always been interested in film, that you've always wanted to do that as a profession for the most part, would you say?
I would say storytelling, and I think I use storytelling as an avenue to explore the world in many ways. And if I had questions or thoughts or just speculations about things, I would maybe come up with a story or base it around that. Or if I felt emotional about something that would kind of resonate, that would also trigger some kind of storytelling aspect.
Is there any stories that stick out in mind from your childhood that you filmed?
That's a really good question. I've always had a curiosity. Philosophy is a thing. I subscribe to a lot of that philosophical thinking, and I think as a young child, a lot of that came out. Tried to use that in my story time. I always would end up creating characters that were invincible and perfect, and that was always a problem because you can't have characters that are perfect or invincible. And I think I did that just because I felt like, okay, what would this be in this world? What would a perfect person character be? From there,
I think like filmmaking where I grew up was as a subject in school wasn't a thing, and I think in most schools, if they have limited funding or just regular funding, they wouldn't have filmmaking or film studies as an option. Certainly lots of independent schools or international schools, private schools would have this kind of thing. I'm sure there's a lot in the States. Really well-funded schools internationally would have film studies as well. In your opinion,
If you think of like all the different subjects that have to be covered in school, do you think that film studies should be taught in school? And if yes, which I'm hoping you'll say is yes, is why, what's the value of that?
I don't know if film, that's a good question because there's a difference between film studies and filmmaking. Film studies is really analyzing film and understanding what it brings out, right? What is it saying? What are the it's more about here's the result of a film and let's analyze that. Whereas filmmaking is more about how can we construct something that others can will go ahead and analyze and or enjoy, and or enjoy. But at its basic, filmmaking is storytelling, and I think that is very important for educational purposes. I think we learn very well through storytelling. Storytelling accesses a range of emotions. If it's done right, it accesses a range of emotions, and I believe emotions themselves are key to learning and salience of new things. So I think because it comes down to storytelling. I think storytelling is really what we want to teach, and I think filmmaking is a big part of that for sure. So I definitely think it should be in the school, but maybe as a part of a larger, broader subject. If that makes
Oh,
sense.
sure, yeah. And it seems like film studies is that analysis more about thinking, whereas the filmmaking is doing, and you often learn more through doing, I would say.
I think both are necessary. I think film analysis is very important, and it's for me, it's enjoyable to read things that people have insights on. But I also, as you said, like I think doing is very important. I think all of it really comes down to usefulness, right? What is it useful for? Yeah, and doing creates a lot of opportunities for problem solving, a lot of opportunities for thinking through things, critical thinking. And traditional filmmaking has a lot of that, a lot of that.
So let's focus on filmmaking as storytelling, just saying. So I think like when I teach narrative writing in my classroom, you typically would follow a story arc with certain elements, like an opening scene, introducing the characters. Even as I explain this, it sounds kind of boring now that I think of it. To break a story down to its elements and then use those elements to create something. But there's a story arc. It's almost like a story mountain kind of idea where there's a lot of events. There's a problem in the story, and then there's a lot of events that happen, and then eventually get solved. And there's a resolution. That's a typical story arc. Although there's a lot others. I'm trying to think. Is it Kurt Vonnegut who has like he says his story is there's no arc, it's just a straight line, and that's if you can make that interesting, that's what makes a powerful story. But anyways,
Well, I think those are all important ways, techniques, methods, modes to convey something that you want to convey, or to explore something you want to explore, or communicate something you want. And I think, like as you're saying, this story arcs, we have a character, you have a goal, you have the obstacle of the goal, you have the resolution or seeming success in achieving the goal, then a failure, and then a reassessment, and then da 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 da. And all of that is I don't know if that's just Western style storytelling, but I know it's very typical American filmmaking. It's, your modern storytelling stuff.
yeah, I'm like,
Is that the only kind, as you're saying? And is that the only kind that works? And why does it work?
yeah,
Or why does
you
it
just
fail?
like I feel like you've described a Hollywood action film. Like I'm thinking Bad Boys, where they're just
Formula, right? It's formula. But it's
you always
also
see
the
the bad
hero's
guy.
journey.
But yeah, yeah. I've taught kids from India, and they told me that their story arcs are just like repetition all the time. It's up and down, never really ends. And that's to the extent I could explain it, but it just does seem that certain different cultures have a different length of time. It connects to something broader, or it's a little more, I suppose, shorter frame of time. But I guess for you, what I was getting at is that with the different elements of storytelling through filmmaking, what for you are like the elements of that? Like how do you think of that in terms of elements?
Like, what elements do I find valuable in storytelling or in
Yeah, or
filmmaking?
maybe like what do people not think about necessarily? Or is there a specific model that you tend to gravitate to?
Well, there are a couple of things. Like I was thinking about this earlier in kind of in preparation. There's a typical conflict. It's conflicts create stories, and that's something that people use as a concept to get their story out. But I feel like there are several other ways to do storytelling or to convey an idea. That's you can do it through connection, and you can also do it through. I don't know if it was the right word is exploration, but it's like curiosity. You use curiosity, and that what happens is each one of these kind of activates our emotions or affective landscape. And what that does, that it cues a person's attention, gears them up to learn something and helps them understand something, which is what you're trying to do as a filmmaker. You're trying to get them to understand something or try to create a specific emotional perspective so that they can either enjoy the movie or they'll believe what you're telling them. Conflict is the most common one. I have problems with that, especially in modern times, because I feel like we have conflict for conflict's sake, and it creates a lot of societal issues, actually, I think. That's some speculation, of course. The one I particularly like is the curiosity one. So the film that well, it's been a while now, like 2 years ago. The feature film that I made that came out 2 years ago called 1 to 0 was my attempt at trying to use curiosity to use kind of curiosity as the whole premise for the way the film is structured. So it's very much like, here's a mystery, you don't know what's going on, you're kind of popped into the middle of a situation, and it's visceral enough that you continue to follow it. You build up more curiosity as you learn more about them, but you have questions. You're like, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And I took a risk basically trying to answer all that stuff at the end rather than what people doing, as you were saying before, like, oh, you have this setting, here's your setting, here are your main characters. You kind of give people an idea of who they are already. And then you change some of that expectation along the way. In this case, I was doing more the opposite. You hear these characters, you have no idea what they're necessarily doing, follow them for a bit, then you learn more about them. And then you learn more about the situation that they're going through, that plot that's happening. And it's kind of a different way of doing it. And for me, I find that to be most interesting. It's kind of thriller. It's kind of like thrillers kind of do that, but they're generally still very conflict based. And again, the reason I think this is important is because it does affect how we understand things, how we initialize the learning process. I guess that makes sense.
Like the viewer's engagement,
Right.
you would say, right?
You have to be very careful about what you're doing because it's not the typical way to engage an audience. So you have to do certain things a certain way so that they stay engaged. And film is great for that kind of thing. Film is fantastic for engaging people, not only because we know that the common trope is that it uses more than one sense, right? We're not just listening, we're watching. But a good way to compare the power of film is to convey the power of film is by comparing it with plays. Now, play, you have a stage, it's generally live, so you have time constraints. You don't have the ability to visually focus on a person other than through lighting. You'll do that through the play. Whereas in film, you have everything at your fingertips. Use specific shots that help convey things, create certain emotions, create certain subtle emotions between each shot. You have plenty of time to shoot because to get what you want out of actors. You can rely on audio cues. You can rely on all kinds of things. You're not stuck to a specific location. You can change the way you edit, the way you put shots together is hugely important and extremely powerful. You're basically maximizing engagement. Film is great at maximizing engagement. It's great at maximizing emotional responses too. I think that's a big one. You can use film probably better than any other form I know of, except because it includes music, so that's a lucky thing, that can really pull out emotions, and you can be somewhat precise. Obviously, psychology is very, very imprecise, right? But you can be as precise as possible to pull out things that you want from an object.
It's almost like there's these subtle moves you do to manipulate the engagement. Like I'm thinking an opening scene is often the landscape, and then here's the setting, here's where we're at. We're on a farm and the sun's coming up, and it's like, okay, here's the house. Okay, here's the something happening in the window. Okay, now we're in the room. And then the perspective just kind of shifts you into like wanting to go more and more and more into it. I wanted to ask you again, can you describe a bit more between the difference between conflict and curiosity, and why you're choosing the curiosity? Because you say conflict is often used, and that's for that emotional engagement, I suppose. And the reason why I ask, because often I think in classrooms we're always trying to engage with curiosity. Conflict can be part of that as well, but we do see it as more of a positive emotional or positive way of engagement. Is it kind of like that for you?
Yeah, again, it's kind of like exploration. Because again, as I mentioned before, as a kid, I like to explore things through storytelling. So I think that's kind of where that idea comes from, and at least through me, or from me. But I also have a little bit of resentment towards conflict because I feel like we overuse conflict for everything. Like if you watch a film, you'll have two people who are friends just arguing with each other. That's what you have to do in film. Otherwise, it's not engaging. And I think that's not necessarily, it's old, and I think it can be damaging because it isn't necessarily a positive emotion you want to convey, right? Remember, there's these things where if you see a negative emotion, people will respond in a certain way to a negative emotion that may not be healthy. And so if they're constantly around negative emotion, from my understanding, it's not necessarily going to give them a healthy dose of what reality is. It's not going to help them with their emotional intelligence, I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they come away from the film with a certain lens, and maybe they're more primed up to view conflict with that lens or view the world in that way. I also think, I don't know if this relates, but the news, I mean, how does news travel? It's always to do with, it's usually bad, usually around conflict. And there are news programs on the internet that made for kids to watch, and it is mostly a little, it's more positive, like some
Good
kind of
news,
cute,
discoveries, fun
right?
things,
Yeah.
right?
And we certainly can use more of that in, I suppose, in the adult world of news consumption. But yeah, I'm not sure.
So I want to kind
Yeah.
of bring it to learning, which I think is important, because when you have these things like conflicts and curiosity, these are kind of affects, right? They're not, some of them are emotions, but they're generally feelings. And feelings, I think, guide a lot of our understanding of things. And when you limit the affective scope or the emotional scope, or that's a better word, spectrum, if you limit the emotional spectrum of your viewer, constantly using only specific emotions, archetypal emotions like fear, anxiety, disgust, again, things that are really revolved around conflict, right? Then you're limiting, I think you're limiting a way to engage in subtle knowledge. Like, again, if you have a very wide spectrum of emotions, then you're probably going to have a larger format for understanding things. So subtle emotions, I think, kind of help. How do I say this without getting too philosophical? Because I don't know if you've ever heard of the philosopher Vellman. I don't know his first name. It's Velleman.
Velamin, yeah, philosopher of
Yeah.
action. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe he's a philosopher of action, but he wrote a specific piece on like emotions as knowledge and how that works, or storytelling as knowledge. And one of the things he talks about is emotional cadence and resolution, and how that affects understanding in general. So you can have a film. This is a great example of how a power film. You can have a film that logically doesn't have a lot of make sense. There may be plot holes, or there may be it's not a linear timeline. It's going back and forth. A lot of things like that that would be logically, rationally confusing. What's stringing things together and what's allowing people to understand is the emotional aspect that goes through. And I think that's very important for learning and understanding things in general. And I secretly hold this idea that affect is super important for understanding things in general. Even like a mathematical equation, especially for learning. If you're solving an equation for the first time, right? Not something we do 1 + 1 = 2. We don't feel very much from that. Ooh, I saw. I already know that, right? And something as a child, when you're learning to do math tables, and you get a kind of kick out of, I answered this right, or at least you feel you've answered it right. Right. So there's that guidance. Emotion or affect is guiding you to what you think is the right answer. And if it feels right, then you kind of convinced that it's correct. And I think that's how knowledge, the understanding of I know something, comes about. So, and this is something that doesn't always work, right? Sometimes you think you've got the answer correct, you really convinced you have the answer correct, and then you find out you're not right. I've had that happen plenty of times when it comes to math, and it's like, okay. But you felt you were right, and you were convinced because you had an effective feeling of something. And I think, again, it's so important when we take it for granted that that part is there throughout our lives and throughout everything we do, all our interactions. And so if we limit that because we're out of practice with all the other subtle emotions and affects, I think we stunt our understanding in general. And especially with today's media, I think like is very, very narrow in terms of what emotions they pull out of you. And that we're constantly bombarded with certain types of conflictual or conflict and emotional manipulation, I guess is the word. I don't want to sound too cynical.
I do think I think our media ecosystem is quite a cynical situation. And so what I appreciate about what you're saying though is that there is a spectrum of emotions that I do think attached to knowledge and I think our traditional view of knowledge, at least, especially in the West or other places, I don't want to overgeneralize, but it is this thing that just kind of sticks in the head, justified true belief kind of formula. But right. But of course, what drives us to seek more knowledge typically is a positive desire, motivation. Another thing I was thinking about in your explanation was, especially with the example of math, is there are Math, there's a lot of curiosity with math and playing with numbers as a puzzle, as a system, the number system being this thing that you could play around with, and you do this and the output is this, and then and so on and so on. But some students have a conflict. They have a fear of math as well because of the culture of the classroom they're in, or there's students that get it right away kind of thing. So I one part of my Better Thinkers project, I think, is moving towards this idea that knowledge is not just this propositional knowledge content kind of thing. It's not just facts nested in sentences, but it is knowledge how, knowing how to do something, knowing what something's like, knowing how to be a certain way within a certain situation. And so to me, the know-how, the knowing what it's like, the knowing how to be there's huge contextual emotional elements to that. And I think if we have a healthy relationship with knowledge or information or media that is the full spectrum, negative and positive emotions, and I think we can be better functioning individuals and better functioning society.
Yeah, and
I
I
think
honestly
I
think we
think
become
yeah,
I think we
go
become
ahead.
better learners too in many ways because we can see if we're adept with that whole emotional range and the whole spectrum, we can say, okay, I'm feeling this now when I'm confronted with this problem. I can go, oh wait, I'm feeling scared, worried about this particular thing, this particular outcome that I'm trying to do. I'm a little scared. And you can kind of recognize that. Like other emotions help you recognize that, or just, obviously metacognition. Oh, I noticed that I'm upset with something and maybe there's a reason for it. And I think that plays in the fact that, like you're saying, if a child's a little nervous with not being able to solve a math problem and they get upset because others are doing it, it's good for them to know that maybe it's a feeling that's I don't want to say unjustified, but like they can see, oh, I'm upset and maybe that's blocking me. And they can also, if they're always stuck in that, because one day everybody has bad days, right? So everybody has bad days. They may feel bad about it, but if people are exposed to a wider range of emotions from the media and positive emotions, subtle emotions, then I think a bad day is only going to be a bad day. Whereas if they're constantly exposed to things that are negative, it will be a bad week, a bad month. Just they'll have a bad attitude in general, especially regarding learning. Where film and storytelling come in is like you remember like word problems where they would give you a word problem that was a mathematical problem, but they would write it as like a Johnny has to buy something and he has 10 apples, da 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 da. They would just do it as a word problem. They were never well constructed as stories. And if I feel like if they had done a better job, I would have done a better job of being engaged in it and not thinking about what if I get this wrong. It would have been like, oh, this is a cool story. I want to help Johnny figure this out. So, and then you go do it. And I think there's, having a little bit of teaching experience, I feel like that was something that I regret not tapping into when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think in math with story problems or word problems, it can be ambiguously written, which makes the math problem interesting. If the comma is in the wrong part of the sentence, it could ambiguate the situation. And so two different mathematicians or students who look at that word problem can solve it. It can, I suppose, map an equation onto that differently because of how they're interpreting it, which is brilliant for a conversation about math. Both can be wrong, but still they've laid out an interesting problem within the problem, and that's what should be valued in
Yeah.
the math class, right?
It's establishing like a premises or something. They maybe their conclusion's not right, but they have a pretty strong like, beginning of
Yeah.
it.
I think in language we'd call that a structural ambiguity. And I have taught this student this year from Germany, and he's always pulling logic on me and giving me three different interpretations on some kind of story problem I've given him. And it was just brilliant because I'm I'm pretty switched on with ambiguity, having a background in philosophy. But, he would catch things that I would, that I didn't think about because I was, going through the motions of teaching and, the volume you have to handle every day. So yeah, I think the one thing I wanted to pick up on as well is like knowledge having can have a negative connotation if you're afraid of making mistakes in front of others. So not knowing can be shameful for some people. So if we bend this back towards the idea of filmmaking, I suppose the subtle moves you do as a filmmaker with that element of those non-negative emotions of conflict, but into curiosity and other things. And I suppose, I don't know if you're definitely not explicitly showing the viewer
You
but
may
they might
show
pick up
maybe
on it.
subtly.
Yeah. But I
Yeah,
suppose
I mean,
a film studies class can like look into it and analyze it. But
I
I
don't know
do
how many
think, yeah.
filmmakers actually are as in tune with the kind of analysis a film studies professional would do. I feel like filmmaking is your general filmmaking, especially your popular filmmaking, is more of a craft. There's probably less emphasis on some of the subtleties, but there's still, I mean, maybe some component filmmakers of a larger film production will be very tuned to certain things. Like an editor may be very, very good at figuring out specifically the emotional cadence that the director is kind of looking for without the director really knowing how to get there. And they may be very, very well tuned. Okay, well, I know that based on this actor and the scene and this stuff, this is how I would compose the edit. Right. And so you're never really telling, at least the idea you should always show, not tell. And I think the reason for that is because telling is boring, right? It's just boring. Here are these equations, go answer it. It's like, what you're saying, if you're using some of that structural ambiguity, in some sense, you're not telling them what to look for or necessarily how you should put this together. You're just showing them this thing. There's a playground here. Can you figure it out? And in some sense, I find most engaging films to be stuff that's similar to that. And I think most people do. I think we all have a pretty strong understanding of modern Western style film language, right?
I can ask you a question about thinking in film. We've kind of, I think, scratched the surface a little bit, but if you were to kind of model yourself as a filmmaker, like what's a typical approach to thinking through the filmmaking process, if there is one?
I mean, there's definitely the logistical aspects that you'd see similar with any kind of project, whether it's a marketing campaign or whether it's any kind of business aspect. I think it's very similar in terms of how are you going to start this? Where's the money coming from? There's those production aspects that are very important, especially as an independent filmmaker. You really have to do all of it. In a larger production that's very compartmentalized, like as I said, you'll have an editor who just edits, and so he or she can spend all their time just thinking about that. For me, I value the part of the process that I value the most and I find most engaging is the part where I think I do the most thinking, which is the script. On the script is really where that backbone of storytelling comes from. If you want to carefully construct a film that's based off of curiosity and exploration rather than conflict, you start there. And you have to make sure that you're trying to think about how others would react. It's like any kind of formal paper you'd write too. It's very similar, but you get to storyteller. You get to make believe. You don't have to stick to any rigorous rational thought in that sense, or at least in most respects. So there is that element in any kind of story too. It does have to be somewhat plausible, right? So plausibility is always a big thing. So that as a filmmaker, thinking about plausibility, thinking about what kind of emotions you're trying to get out of your audience in a way that's going to have them follow your vision the same way you follow it. So there's a lot of critical thinking in that sense because you're working off of it's a weird kind of socializing with people. Like you're trying to communicate. That's what you're doing. You're trying to communicate your worldview. And generally, traditional filmmakers have a worldview, which means that they have something that they want people to understand through their lens. If you don't have a worldview, it's generally your worldview is I'm trying to sell a product, and this is the product, and I da 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 da, right? So like if you're looking at a Hollywood film, they have a big committee. Generally, that's kind of the worldview is how can we engage as many people as possible to watch this movie and give us money, that's just how it is. I'm going to be blunt about it. That's how it is. They can code it with as many creatives as they want, but having working in marketing, knowing a bit about how that works, you can bring all the creatives you want, but when it comes down to it, if you're not communicating what the leadership in that marketing sales world want, then you're gonna have to do it over. So there's that block. Whereas if you're doing more of an independent film and you're self-funded or you have producers that are let you do what you want, then it comes down to just communicating the way you want and having a worldview. I think that's very important is having a worldview. So it's kind of like having um, a background theory. And with that background theory, you are going to follow it to its logical progressions to get to a particular goal. So it's similar to that. So I have my worldview. I'm going to create a story that follows this worldview, to its end, to its conclusion, if you will. And sometimes you go somewhere unexpected because of that. So as a filmmaker, I generally go with theme first. Theme is very important. I will take a theme. I want to explore this idea. We'll explore this theme, and from there, I will try to construct characters. Try to flesh out characters as fully as possible that align with that theme, or maybe they're in conflict with that theme. Either way, you can bring conflict in, or they're exploring that theme maybe as a character. And same with the plot. Plot is generally a way to keep people engaged with getting to your point. At least that's the kind of filmmaking I like.
So just to clarify on the the writing of it, is it you're not just talking about dialogue, but is it also like the frames or the type of shooting you would do as well?
So technically, when you're writing a script, you don't worry about frames. You'll worry about scenes. You'll worry about dramatic beats. So it's very similar to writing a play. But when you see, like a lot of times people think, well, a script has like camera moves left and does this. That's usually the shooting script, and that's usually what the director's job is to do, is to say where they want to see things in the camera, et cetera, et cetera. The scriptwriter's job is to manipulate the director into thinking that they're the ones who came up with that idea. And you do that with words. Generally, with scripts, you want to use like very, very simple, what is it, present simple form. You don't even use, you don't use any past tense. You don't use, my brain is mush right now. Yeah, you basically simple present. That's all you're using. She walks, but
Okay.
you can color it up a bit. And as you get better at it, you just kind of it's looks. You can add an ing at the end of it, present progressive. You can do that to some extent, because you do want it to be engaging for the person who's interested in maybe helping you make it. You want to make sure it's engaging, right? So it's like writing anything. And it's in a full complete story. It's right there. It's done, and it's just a different style of writing. And that's what I like about it, because I've accomplished something. Even if it never gets made, I've made this story, and it's on paper, and it's done. But from there, as a filmmaker, you have much more work to do, right? As you're saying, there's a lot more creative thinking, and creative and critical thinking, I think, come into play. They kind of go hand in hand in this sense, and that's maybe one of the pluses, that you're not limited to, again, that pure logical structure. You can be creative. You can be nonsensical. You can do things you can risk things that are out of the norm. After the script is done, you do take the script and you start analyzing, how do I emphasize this particular thing? How do I convey this in a way that's interesting for both me and for others? What kind of visual tone do I want to bring? What visual restrictions do I want? And again, what kind of pacing do I feel is necessary for this story that emphasize? So a lot of the rest is emphasizing and bringing to fruition the story. And that takes a lot of brain power. I'm not sure it's it's actually, that's part of my favorite part, pre-production. When you get into actually filming, it becomes an extremely social endeavor when you get to production, and it becomes very much a group project. And that is where you have to understand. And again, it's good to have really strong emotional intelligence when you're on set with people, because everybody's different. Everybody's ready to do this. And you want to make sure that you have the right environment to get what you want out of people. And so there's a lot of like social navigating. And I'm not the best at that. Not as necessarily as bad as maybe George Lucas is rumored to be. Like, just make it faster. I like working with actors in many ways, because it's a chance to connect with them. It's a chance to see your characters. It's a chance to really work with someone else to help make what you think was good better. Same with the cinematographer and the lighting technicians and everybody, really. And that's always good.
Yeah, so being an independent filmmaker, you have to stretch yourself across all those different contexts. It's like the solitude of the logistical production or logistical like script writing part where you're trying to I don't know, in the filming part, then you have to do all these different shots and frames, and then it has to cohere, come together in the end somehow, especially if you're trying to jump around and create curiosity, I suppose. And then just working with, you have your own vision, I'm sure, but then like working with a different director and other people are involved, like you have to manage their creative, I suppose, their ideas as well, which may not exactly jive. So there must be a lot of conflict in the process. Yeah.
You have to manage their taste, and you have to manage their talent, much as you would like a leadership from a company. You have to make sure that you're fostering the best out of them, and you have to make sure that your creativity, or their creativity, isn't changing what you want, but you also want their creativity, because sometimes it makes things better, and you have to have the ego to be like, well, that's a way better idea than I was going to do. Let's do that. But sometimes you feel great in the moment. You're like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do the shot. And then you realize, actually, that doesn't work for this.
Mm.
But that's where editing comes in. Post-production is great because then you can look at things without the stress of let's get the shoot done during this timeline. You have a little bit of time, and especially as an independent filmmaker, because you don't have necessarily here's when we're releasing this right now nationwide. You have to have it done at a certain time. You can take your time, look at the edit, and kind of go back to that screenwriting mode where you're like, okay, how can I emphasize this particular part? And you can do that with generally, I think it's best to do it on your own, not with an editor until you've got your first kind of go through. And then they can go ahead and refine things and say, okay, well, that's not communicating what you want. Let's try this. And then you can, oh, yeah, right. That's a good idea. And it can also work the other way where you come in and say, that's not what I want. Let's try this. I think probably ideally you want two people doing the editing. I've generally done it by myself with maybe some advice from people who are, want to show it. They're like, oh, I didn't get that. That was too quick or stuff like that. But I think two editors is probably a good way to go. And that's again because it's like peer review. You have somebody going, this isn't the way you think it is. Have you thought about this?
Yeah, we get stuck in our heads, right? So I think any endeavor we do where we're creating from scratch and trying to, we hold on to things that, what do we call them? We hold on to our babies, our ideas that we want to follow through. And sometimes they just get killed in the process, right? But, and we need people that, two heads are better than one, basically, for the
Yes, but
most part.
any more than three, I think you get the whole like too many cooks in the kitchen.
Hmm.
And I definitely learned that from marketing video work and stuff like that. Where it's just like there's too many people in here, and it becomes less salient or it just becomes watered down. That's something you have to navigate.
A couple of things I was thinking about. I interviewed my former high school English teacher, and she's not a teacher anymore. She works in the film industry as well. She's like an eco sustainability consultant because I guess there's a lot of waste that comes from movies, right?
Yeah, that's big productions.
So in the US, so she films in Canada because I guess it could be cheaper to film in Canada. So Winnipeg, Manitoba, where I'm from, is like it's a site for movies all the time. But she just said there's so much waste, and actually there's an incentive for these large production studios to reduce their waste by the government because they get like a tax cut. So what she does is she just kind of tabulates all the different she just oversees like the purchasing of different things, the waste management of different things, and then she has an assessment of that report, and that gets, I guess, given to the head studio, and they end up saving more money then because they're more eco-sustainable. But when she talked to me about the mechanics of the film, it actually just killed the mystique of it for me. How large films are made, and even the idea of like the Grammy, not the Grammy, the any kind of movie awards, the Oscars or Golden Globes, the people who are often accepting those awards, that there's so many people below them that should be up there as well, it would seem, but they're
Well,
just
yeah,
getting
absolutely. I
get
mean,
removed
it's
from
the
it.
same architecture as any kind of business, honestly. You have leadership. I've got the award for this best marketing, but it was like 16 other people that put in so much work and time and effort, didn't take vacation, neglected their child to get something done. And it's very big. It is, I mean, it is a business, right? It is a business. On that scale, it's definitely a business. I think, again, this is really interesting. I tell people a lot, like even in businesses like marketing, which I think is probably the biggest economic endeavor on the planet, is marketing. Marketing things. Sales is probably there too. I feel like the amount of creativity, the amount of critical thinking, the amount of intelligence that goes into marketing a product is unbelievably huge. It is insane how brain power goes into marketing a product or marketing a service. And I feel like we could do so many good things if we weren't paying attention to marketing things to people, right? And we have marketing because, and again, I'm looking at it from the lens of like video marketing. You're marketing through commercial, like for an Apple commercial, something like that. There's so many aspects to that, aside from the actual production that really it just takes a lot of brain power to do for some reason, and people are all about it. It's just amazing. I'm not sure I like it. I wish it was put to better use, but
Some time ago, we were talking about the film industry is going to change because of artificial intelligence.
it has changed.
What's It
Absolutely.
has changed already, and even just like basic technology, like streaming services, have changed I think the economics of film. You see a lot more. I don't know if you want to say washed up Hollywood actors, but there's a lot more Netflix movies being released that aren't the most creative, but they have the star power. And I think they get streamed enough to generate enough income that it's worth doing for that actor, that even though it's not that, I don't know, not that great of an art, you might say, at least from my value judgment. So
Yeah, I'm hesitant to use the word art for anything that's even what we consider art. I feel like it's a very, I'm not sure what it is, and I think craft is usually the word that I use for things like that. There's a craft involved. Like there's thought involved. There's critical thinking and on some aspect, like whether or not when you're going through the production process, there's that involved, but it's not necessarily, again, like that. I'm trying to portray a worldview that's free from economic constraints, and I'm trying to communicate something I value to others in a way that's creative. I don't see that as being modern film in general. I think maybe there are some people that are able to do that, maybe more than I think, actually, now that I start thinking about it. There's some
well, I
good auteurs out there that are doing that, and
well, I'm
they
wondering
have
about
to.
I'm wondering about like film festivals, like independent film festivals. Like, is that still pure in a sense, art
I don't
wise,
know if
or
anything's pure anymore or ever was. I yeah, I think there's aspirational film festivals that really do a good job of curating good films that are not super commercialized, but also they're of high quality. My favorite, and I'm biased because I lived there for 10 years, is Busan International Film Festival. And that festival generally gives first or second time director a chance to show their film. Generally, the films have to have some kind of social or cultural message or thing that they want to say. And I say message not like you should think this, but more like it involves some cultural aspect that people want to express, or some social aspect that people want to explore. And I feel like that's a great festival. It's a really big festival too. So they do have movies that are their mainstream movies, but a lot of those movies are still fit with their umbrella of that social and cultural aspect. There are other ones. There's a lot of small festivals that kind of bring that homegrown. The films aren't very good necessarily, but they bring people who want to make movies who don't have very much money. They make it from whatever their day job change, if they have any, and they go make it. And those are fun too, because you get to see people enthusiastic, right, about making that kind of stuff. But as you're saying, like AI is a very different. It's a very similar animal to technology in general, but it's also a very different animal. And how that's going to affect film and say film festivals and things like that. One, it's going to make legitimate film harder to do, because people are going to be like, why do I need to do that? Why would I want to spend that money when I can have AI create certain video stuff? And like any technology, I think we're just worried that it's going to dumb everything down and make everything, as they call now, AI slop. It's not creative. It's the same thing. And you and I think, maybe dabbled in talking about this before, about what AI can and cannot do, and some of the constraints with it's gathering information, and it's not being creative in the way we think we are creative. I'm neutral about if that's actually true or not at this point. I don't know enough um, to say. I'm very skeptical about human creativity as well. So but yeah, it's hard to say what AI means to me as a filmmaker, other than it can make things easier and it may make things worse.
yeah, I mean, you'd hope that I'm talking about this in education with other educators as well, is that I hope it actually brings us to a point where we just have to do the stuff that tech can't do, is like it pushes our thinking or augments the way we think about things or how we view knowledge or how we learn. And so I in some way it might be able to automate menial tasks without,
Taking away the process. Like I think we talked
yeah,
about before too. Like for me, I definitely push back on people who are, I'm using AI to help me write. I'm using AI to do that. Like I don't want AI to help me write my script or anything, my essays or whatever, because that's the part I like to do. I like to struggle. I like to struggle with understanding concepts, clarifying concepts. I like that struggle, and I think that's part of how I learn and how I think. I think, and again, maybe this is also something pertaining to filmmaking in general for me, is that I write to think, and maybe I make films to think. I feel like that's where I do my thinking. That's where I'm doing my best thinking. I can see what I've written on paper and go, that's terrible. I don't understand what I was getting at. Let's refine that. If I have AI doing it for me, I feel like I'm not practicing. I'm being one of those people that gets what they want when they want it. And I feel like that is something that is definitely detrimental to a healthy mentality. Getting what you
yeah,
want when.
I think it depends on the situation, the medium. Like, so I'm trying to find my stride on Substack. I often like to be a successful Substack stacker, you need to produce like 2 pieces a week to get traction. And I find it impossible. And so I find myself not being able to like get my thoughts in order when I'm writing. And then I will use AI to look at how it would smooth it out. And like, that's how I should have written it. But of course, when I did my philosophy paper a year and a half ago
We didn't have that.
yeah, like I wasn't really using that. I was just having to like, kind of go through it myself and then talk to my thesis advisor and then he would just like, this doesn't make sense, doesn't it? So in a sense, I guess where at the moment with AI is I do ask it to like, does this follow, is this signposting the right way? Is it cogent? And sometimes if I'm really stuck, is there a better way to say it? And often, even though it does produce something, I will still change what it produced for me, but I feel happier with how it kind of gave me a nudge. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that you made a good point. Like when we talk to our professors or advisors, they're usually the ones who kind of give you that advice or that aspect. And I feel like that's AI in one sense is doing that in a way that's much faster, right? But there's an aspect of socializing with your advisor that's missing. And I think that's a very important part. And I believe I'm wary of the dopamine rush we get when we use AI to solve problems and things like that. I think it ends up doing that, and it can be bad. It's not necessarily bad because dopamine rushes are cool to a certain extent, I think. But I definitely feel, at least maybe I'm just very prideful. Like I don't want it to do the work I feel is necessary for me to do. But I definitely agree that like there's times when having it advise you on things, or even having you have a topic you want to research. Obviously, it's great to go, hey, this is the topic I'd like to research. What are some of the articles that talk about this, or what do you think about this concept I've written? How does that play? And then I've done that, and generally just to fool around. And sometimes it'll give me something shockingly insightful, like, oh, this is very similar to this argument. Oh, that's great. I didn't know about this argument. And then I'll go ahead and read it and go, okay. So in some sense, it's like a good research tool for that. And as you're saying, like it is a good editor in many ways. It's always good though to know why. Like, why is this not as concise? And yes, we get that when we see somebody else, like the AI's simplified, more coherent version, we can go, oh, okay, I know I see that this one's better. But sometimes we may need help on why that's better. And person might do a better job at that, or at least we need to be able to train ourselves to ask that question. Why does this one seem to be better than the one I've written? Generally, sometimes it's obvious, or generally it's obvious, not all the time. Sometimes you have to think about it more like, why does this one work better than mine? Oh, it's rhythmic, less punctuation, that kind of stuff. And hopefully we're doing that automatically when we get a result like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not necessarily refining our ideas, it's just refining how we convey it. So you would still want to you're still doing the front end of it or the back end of it, however you want to
But as a
think about
writer,
it.
you
Like,
really want to be skilled in conveying, right? You want to be, okay, this is my idea. How can I convey it? And this is the thing. I was reading, I think it was a Substack article. Can't remember it. He's a very famous author, Neil Stephenson. He did the Diamond Age, books like that. He was talking about micro decisions in artistic ventures. So if you have a person who's like, I have this idea. Let's make this. I'll get 50% of the money and you get 50% of the value. Go ahead and make it. Here's my idea. The amount of work you're doing, the amount of critical thinking you're doing, the amount of logical analysis you're doing, the amount of creative work you're doing to make those micro decisions off of an idea somebody else has had is extremely important, extremely hard, extremely valuable. What happens is that with AI, somebody can go, I have an idea, presses a button, that work is done for them. And I think that work is extremely important. Those micro decisions, that process is, again, part of what I like about writing. And I think learning how and being masterful at the way I present something, way I present an idea is just as important as the idea itself. And it's a great tool for creating the way you do something is going to affect how people feel about it. It's going to affect, again, how you communicate, what their response will be. And I think that's extremely important. And in film, it's the same way. You need to know how to do that. You have to be masterful at that. AI will just take a bunch of other people's stuff and put it together and do it for you. And sometimes it's awesome. Sometimes it's not.
yeah, and I do think, I don't know if there is a lot of slop out there on the internet now. I look at like I look at Sports Illustrated articles that get sent to me from the website. Like it's such a nuanced topic about a specific NFL player on a specific team during this middle of the week, and it's just like this is generated for sure, not necessarily written. I think there's a lot of slop on the internet. I guess I would hope is that in terms of writing, I guess I'd hope that like the really good writing, that the micro decisions approach that you're talking about, that writers have always done in refining their ideas through their writing, that'll bubble to the top. That's what will still hold currency. But there is this, it's funny, there's always a quality versus time dichotomy in almost every profession. Almost everyone I've talked to on this podcast, talking to a chef, it's like quality and time. A really well prepared meal versus, fast food. Getting it done well, but also make sure the customer doesn't wait too long. Talking to a flight attendant, how you have to go through these procedures, but you still have to be very pleasant with the customers. Oh, I'll help you get that into the overhead bin, sir, and deal with their whatever baggage.
I feel like
Not
that's a very
just
tough job.
yeah, yeah.
Well,
Try to,
there's that triangle that's like time, money, and quality. You can have, I think it's like you two of these, like if you want.
you're happy.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think
that's a
that's
good
like
one. Yeah,
I use that a lot in the marketing world. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but
yeah. Time, quality, and money. Yeah, so I do find Substack is an interesting space, because I want it to be, I find myself compelled. I want to write philosophy on there, but I take shortcuts in writing philosophy, and I don't think I should be writing philosophy on there. I'm trying to convey to a general audience. But I was saying to you that when I released uh, Humans, Champions of Qualitative Reasoning, like there
right.
were some shortcuts I took in trying to explain what computational theory of mind was, and I'm just thinking Jonathan's gonna rip this apart. You're a nice
I mean,
person,
I have
and
a
I think
friend. I have a large, strong opinion on computational theory of mind and also representational theory of mind, and that they're different and all these other things. And yeah, it's like you love it. Substack's supposed to be, oh, it's a long form thing, but it's like if you have to produce stuff every day, you can't do quality long form content without as you're saying, like using AI to do all of it for you, or just staying up all night and killing yourself over it. It's an okay platform, but it's never gonna. No platform we have is anything except an economic engine. Even the name of Substack, which I'm looking at now, that I wrote down, it's a new economic engine for culture. That right there pisses me off, honestly, because it's about economics, it's about culture. Now it's going to be commoditized, and here's how we're going to do it for you. All your thoughts and writings will be here for us to commoditize. And we always complain about like, well, my research article is now published in this universe or not universe, it was just this scientific publication, but I don't get any money for it. And there's that aspect too. It's there everywhere we go. But at least in that way, I think it goes back to that whole emotional thing. Like for a Substack thing, you have to compress a lot, and you're limiting the ways you can express things, and therefore you're limiting the reactions people will give. And whereas a long form essay or long form film, because we can compare this to the video bites that we have these days, you're limiting your expression, your expression as an artist. You're limiting the emotional reaction that the audience is going to give. Whereas a long form traditional film or a long form traditional essay offers more, and it requires more from the reader, maybe requires more. You have to go through a bunch of larger range of emotional cadence and resolution. You have to go through a larger range of thought process or thinking. You have to go through more to maybe to summarize on your own, right? You're getting this very long, drawn out argument, for example, that you have to assimilate, understand, and regurgitate to someone else in a coherent way. Whereas with certain forms like Substack and other, even though they're long form, they're still summarized in some sense. They're still summaries. Maybe not so much on Substack because you do get a larger, in many
there's
ways.
niches for sure on Substack. Yeah. Yeah.
What's
Go ahead.
interesting though is
Finish.
like that YouTube actually they do a lot of the short form stuff, but they also their algorithm encourages 2 hour videos. So that's good. That's encouraging, right? That's for an economic reason, based on their algorithm, but it gives us an excuse or a chance to slow down a bit and be more nuanced and more detailed, and that forcing others to do better critical thinking or more critical thinking.
There's a pretty prominent Substack right now. Her name is Melvika. She's had a few articles go quite viral. And she's touted the Gen Z philosopher. And I was watching an interview with her, and she was talking about how a really well written research article can end up getting 10 citations throughout history. But she was thinking about how can she communicate better her ideas, and she was, yeah, I think she did start in TikTok, and so she was saying, or maybe it was YouTube, but because she was saying it was like they were 90 seconds long, and she would have these very punchy kind of commentary on culture, how we communicate or how we live or interact or don't interact with others, and it'd be 90 seconds long. It would really like get a lot of clicks and views. And
So here's a
so,
question I have, not
yeah,
to interrupt. Here's a question I have because this is really interesting. You mentioned that she was upset, I guess, with the fact that she only got 10 citations for like a really well-researched paper.
no, she was saying she would notice that something of really high quality would just end up in obscurity in that way. It wasn't her work, but
Particularly.
I do think she is in academia though, or studying her PhD in something. I'm not really sure, but this is, I think, the space that she's working within. She tends to understand how to manipulate, I guess, push the buttons to go viral somehow. I guess clearly because she's done that, and it's understanding probably the, I don't know, the lack of quality of that, I suppose, in some way. I don't know. But it outperforms in terms of it it distributes a lot further than
But at what
the
cost? Because you're
for cult. Yeah,
you're
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 going.
yeah, as you're
Yeah,
saying, the quality is going to drop,
yeah,
the detail and the breadth and scope is going to drop, or maybe not the breadth, but at least the depth is going to drop. And you really have to prioritize what's more important, getting something out there that's really super well researched and has, as articulate as possible. 10 people see it, 10 people get it. Or is it, I want to reach as many people as I can? And I think my suspicion is that modern times socializing is done through this kind of media. And really what it's substituting is socializing. And what happens is that all our endeavors are being hijacked by the yearning to socialize. And that I think is not healthy. I think, yes, I want to be super, I don't want to be, actually, I personally don't want to be super famous or fine with lots of money, but we want to feel valued, right? We want to feel valued for things we value. Because it's different when you feel that when you're valued for things you don't really care about, which is sometimes happens. And there are many ways to feel valued. And a lot of that comes down to socializing with people, being connected with people. You can feel valued in that way. And then sometimes some deficit in where you want to feel valued can be compensated for by other areas like that social network. And that's that. And I feel like today's world is that's not there. That social um, safety net isn't there. And so we end up trying to find everything we do has to be a popularity contest. Everything we do has to click that,
get clicks. Yeah,
yeah, to be valued. I'm not nothing against this person. I have no idea um about them at all. So I'm not attacking them in any sense. I'm not trying to, so hopefully it doesn't come off that way.
yeah,
But I think
but
there's a point there at least. I think there's something to be cautious of. And
yeah,
we're worried about how many
there's
people are saying it.
there's two sides of that value coin. It's the value that you put into the work that you actually believe in, and then that might not get any value on the other side of that coin. So there is this, I don't know, at some point people in their life have a reckoning where they just want to do something for the sake of the value that they see in it versus getting notoriety from others, right? And so suppose if there's a true artist or crafts person or however you want to say it, in this age of just quick hits, quick likes, quick disposable media and information, then I suppose you just create what you see as value and then others will follow, right? I mean, typically, I think of music, it's the bands that seem to be the most popular would be the ones that had their own kind of style and just did the thing because they like to do it and they get popular and then they try to recreate their own image and then they tend to fail at that, right? So
I think there's, and I'm cutting you off because I'm very good at that. I apologize. I think
this is me interviewing you. So please say as much as you want.
so. I feel like there's definitely truth in that, but there's always the format in which you communicate your project or your artistry. And I think in today's culture we have economized formats that only allow you to do it a certain way. So if you do find yourself being, I'm really good at long form poetry, or really want to be very in depth on something, you struggle to be successful at it because the format for that is gone, or the format for that is all but gone. I think there are ways around that. Are you saying like bands, live bands, if they can make a name for themselves being live bands, generally could do you well because you're performing. There's no format other than the venue you have to worry about. Whereas if you're trying to make a name for yourself and sustain a living by putting your music on Spotify, good luck. Good luck. It's not going to work unless there's something about you that goes viral, or something. You already have a connection of people, or you already have a lot of wealth or leverage, and so be it. If you do, great. But I feel like there's the medium which can affect the message, right? The medium can definitely affect the message, for better or worse. And I think sometimes we forget that, especially with this day and age. My generation, like, just most of this stuff now was never a thing when we were aspiring to be what we wanted to be. Never even heard of it. It was all Star Trek for us. It was like, wow, this is a Star Trek future we'll never see. And then, lo and behold, we were wrong. Here it is.
Here we are, floating in space.
Yeah, everything except the space exploration.
I'm gonna try to bend this a bit back into filmmaking again. I did have this idea. So here's what I did. I did do a chat GPT thing. I'm trying to think, and I said, give me two directors where this saying that I'm coming up with would have a quote that relates to it. Okay. I hope that's not cringe for you, but let me just find what I did though. I can't remember what it was. It was about explanation inference. I don't know how I've written, but I wrote something like, are there ways that like filmmakers try to draw out an explanation or lead the viewer to an explanation that requires the viewer's inference, something like that. And it came up with two quotes from David Lynch and Stanley Kubrick. I don't know if you're fans of these two, but the David Lynch one is, I don't know why people expect art to make sense. They accept the fact that life doesn't make sense. Okay. So like, I guess from his perspective, because David Lynch is very kind of, I don't know how you would say it, like surreal.
Yeah, that's his
I
niche,
don't
right?
know.
To make
Yeah.
nonsensical things that are hard to follow, but do have maybe maybe not emotional, but effectual throughput, so that you still want to watch it. You're still engaged,
Yeah.
right?
But still
And
don't really know what the hell's going on
yeah,
necessarily. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
Right.
Was that a quote from him, or was that a generated quote from?
Well, this is the quote it led me to. It has, so it says, I don't, yeah. So I'm assuming it is a quote from him that it found on the internet found on his training data. And then the other one is Stanley Kubrick. It was, I tried to avoid a didactic approach to filmmaking. The meaning should be discovered by the viewer. So those are the two quotes that it gave me from famous filmmakers.
So are you asking me where I stand on that question, or
I,
that?
what comes up from you, I guess.
That meaning isn't discovered, it's created. That's a very philosophical thing to say, of course. Yeah, I think so many things. Like I'll just say, like for the David Lynch aspect, I disagree that life doesn't make sense. I think life is always going to be full of learning, but that we can make sense of it because we make the sense, we create it. Again, the same thing with Kubrick. And I like both of them for their worldview, really, because that's kind of what David Lynch is, definitely more of a worldview than Nancy Kubrick's. Kubrick is more like his technical way of communicating. And I think both of them really do a good job of not force feeding people through your typical tropes, right? Kubrick was notorious. Like his 2001 is very. If you watch it enough, you feel you can follow the logic. You feel like there's logic there. But if you've seen it like the first or second time, it's not quite sure. You're not quite sure where the logic is in terms of what's going next, what's happening next. But you're still engaged because there's I don't know if it's effective or effectual, a feeling that goes through it that's helping you stay engaged. David Lynch is the same way. Kubrick was, in my opinion, notoriously unemotional. Maybe if effective, but not emotional. Like his stuff just never felt emotion, never brought out emotions for me. But I always watched them out of like curiosity, and out of there was definitely a sense of engagement that I gave to it. Like, but it was never an emotional engagement. It was always, or it was an effective engagement. I was feeling something, and I liked the feeling, and it may have been just curiosity, like where's this going? Where's this going? This is really interesting. Inference versus explanation in terms of filmmaking. I think inference is 100% filmmaking. Like every cut is an inference, right? You cut between a guy swinging his fist and cut from that to somebody they're spitting out blood, right? You don't even show the hit. You just show this, you infer what's happening, right?
Hmm.
So it's very folk psychology in some sense. It's using that kind of understanding of human interaction and physics in a way that you don't need to bring every aspect in. You use inference to tell your story. Explanation, I think, again, you need plausibility in film for the most part, unless it's really emotionally engaging. You don't like, again, David Lynch stuff. That's not plausible, but it's really interesting. That's probably where maybe where an explanation comes in. Like you see a character do something and it just doesn't make sense. It's out of left field. You're leaving the viewer with a sense of why. So you're leaving them without an emotional resolution, with an effectual feeling resolution. I don't know. Is it effectual or is it effective? I don't know. I'm talking about affect. Affect, for people who don't know, is you know,
Affect is the emotional
right. It encompasses
aspect.
emotions, but it's also like
Yeah.
pain and like boredom and curiosity and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's really feeling, even like if you stomach pain can be that. So if you feel disgust and your stomach hurts from a movie, that may be intentional.
Yeah.
But that aspect I feel like is so it's, again, if you don't have that resolution, sometimes that leaves a bad taste in people's mouths, because I don't know why this person did that, and there was no reason for not. You maybe have to think a little bit to why, and it may not be revealed to you. And sometimes that's great. Sometimes filmmakers are really good at leaving that out there for you, because it's actually more engaging to leave it out. You think about the movie more. You engage in some kind of thought process.
Yeah. Imagine you leave the movie theater, you're on a date or you're with a friend and there's two of you, the movie's being carried with you as you leave that movie theater and walk off to your car or walk off back home, because they're talking about like what happened or how did you see that? Or, like, can you explain
Yeah,
that to me?
exactly.
And so how
And
did you
sometimes it's
interpret
good
that?
to leave an ambiguity, right? Like as a person may not, nobody's going to interpret anything the same. It may be very closely similar, but never exactly the same. So every person's going to have their opinion about something. And I think as a filmmaker, at least in the past, my idea was you want to do your best to make everybody align with you exactly on what you're trying to say, what your world vision is, what your story is. And you want them to follow the same emotions you feel when either you were writing it or when you were editing it or when you watch it. You want them to follow that. I feel like that's, at least has been in the past, my goal is to make sure that I'm portraying this thing exactly the way I see it. And that's probably an impossibility, but people are very good at crafting uh, a close proximity to that. And I think that for me, maybe still is the goal to get people to do that. But then there are times when you want them to breathe. You want them to infer something different. And there are plenty of tools to do that in filmmaking, probably more so than most other art forms. Well, I don't know about that, but, but yeah.
Well, I mean, most novels you'd read, people have book clubs just to bring in their own experience, connect to their own experiences, and interpreting and sharing how with others as well. Even like the reading level of a 10-year-old is typically they're getting into more deeper themes in novels and things like that, where it requires not having a right answer, but just sharing your opinion about the book or the story and explaining why you believe this or think that or connecting with another person's opinion.
They're at that point where, like, their life experiences, they can take things from their life experience more clearly because they're a little older. They've had more life experience, and they can use
Yeah.
that, interpret what they're reading, and sometimes bias what they're reading, what they're thinking.
Yeah, or I think any novel I do read out loud with students, it typically isn't based in middle school because that's where they're going next year, and they tend to be very interested in what middle school is going to be like. So it's very proximal to their lives for most of them, anyways. I guess but want to bend this back to what can young people aspire to as filmmakers at this point, and what'll be. My question is about if someone really young wants to get into filmmaking, I mean, what advice would you have for them? What skills should they work on? What value should they see in it?
Again, I think again, the idea of exploring that emotional, or even expanding their um, emotional, keep forgetting the word, spectrum.
Affective spectrum.
Yeah, the
Okay.
affective
Yeah.
spectrum. Let's say that
Let's
expanding
call
their
it that.
affective spectrum. It also helps them understand other people, right? Because you have to kind of learn about the characters in your story. You have to know deeply what they care for, what they don't care for. And I would say if you're going to do filmmaking, go for it for that reason rather than I want to get as many likes as possible. Because again, you're just going to conform to whatever app you use, right? In terms of that emotional spectrum or that affective spectrum, you're going to limit yourself in your exploration. Whereas if you're not worried about that, you can use it as a tool for insight. You can use it as a tool for a conceptual exploration. You can use it as a tool for understanding yourself. You can use it as a tool for knowledge in general. Like it really can be a way to learn in many ways, many things, not just like the logistics of running a business or running a group project or running or socializing with people when you want something out of them. There's also that creative aspect and that conceptual understanding, and hopefully some philosophical aspect too. But yeah, I would
Just
say
had
if
to
you're
put
gonna
that in.
go for it that on that route.
Yeah, and I would say, yeah, I mean, the value of it is as being able to communicate ideas to others that taps into that affective vein for the viewer. I think
Definitely.
I think a lot of issues that a lot of really important things fall flat in terms of how they're communicated. So I think if a young person can learn how to communicate through different mediums, and filmmaking being one that's very multimodal, I suppose. If you can learn how to do that really well, to get a message to shine through, the value of that message to shine through, and maybe you're getting both sides of that coin. You're being able to convey the value you want, and the value is received.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's that's what filmmaking is probably very uh, is a good test for whether your values are portrayed the way you want them to, and making sure that you communicating it well enough so that the value you expect back is the value you get. But it's also a good way of saying, hey, I didn't get the value back that I wanted. And it, because sometimes failing is part of the deal of life, right? So it's also a good way to say, okay, well, maybe I didn't communicate well enough, or maybe this just isn't something other people value, and that's okay. And that's fine. So it's a good playground for that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think schools, or as educators, we need to start really doubling down on that. Like, let schools be laboratories for failure, laboratories for mistakes, and still seeing the value in that. We have to shift out of this here's the end product kind of mindset. It needs to be unfinished work, really messy
You
in
got to
terms of
do the work.
learning.
That process is more
Yeah,
important, right? The
yeah,
process is
and
what's going to get you there.
1,000 failures to become who you're supposed to be, if it's a young filmmaker or a writer or a storyteller or whatever. So yeah, I think that's a good, unless there's anything else you want to say,
I think that's
I
good.
think
I
that'd
think
be,
that's great.
yeah, I think that was a really good conversation. And thanks for coming on to and talking to me and speaking to me on the Better Thinkers podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It was great. A lot of fun.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan. My biggest takeaway from this conversation with Jonathan is a profound realization: no matter how carefully a filmmaker crafts their vision, the audience will inevitably bring their own meaning to the experience. Sometimes this aligns with the filmmaker's intentions for meaning, but often it doesn't, and that's not a flaw. It's an amazing feature. This happens because we all perceive art, the world, and each other through the lens of our own experiences. The filmmaker and viewer come from different backgrounds, different lives, and they may not share common ground for meaning, but that's where the magic happens. Think about all the decisions a filmmaker must make. How do you frame a shot? Do you pan out or zoom in? Do you show everything explicitly, or do you leave things mysterious and ambiguous? Each of these choices forces the viewer to become an active participant, to infer, to interpret, to fill in the gaps. And that's an incredible thinking skill we can all develop. The ability to piece together different elements and create space for the viewer's mind to fall into and interpret the experience. The filmmakers create something designed to draw out meaning they'll never fully control or even have access to. The explanation of the film becomes co-constructed between creator and the audience. This shows us that communication isn't just about transmitting information, it's about moving people. You're pulling on something emotional inside them, engaging them, and ultimately shifting how they see the world. I think the only way to build this kind of thinking is to experiment with different media and test your ideas on friends and family. Be creative in how you create space for that temporal engagement that genuinely moves your audience. When you find meaning in your message, that leaves a deeply effective impression. You've discovered something far more powerful than any standard form of communication could ever achieve. Thanks for joining me on Think Like a Filmmaker. Until next time, keep looking at the world through the director's lens.